Hi. So I want us to think about a very important idea in philosophy known as the subjective-objective dichotomy. Dichotomy is just a complicated word for conflict. So before we really move any further into our discussions of ethics and get into some of these ethical theories that are presented in your book, we really need to get a handle on why subjective and objective can never agree, why they are always going to be opposed. So I want you to think back to some of your initial responses to those case studies we looked at last time. Tracy Latimer, the conjoined twins, Jody and Mary, and baby Teresa. So when you were first reading those case studies, I'm sure a lot of you had an initial gut reaction. Maybe you thought one way because it seemed like something your parents would have told you. You know, when you think about where our initial ideas about ethics come from, often it is something like that. It's something like, well, I just had this gut feeling, or, I emotionally responded this way, or, well, my parents took me to church and this is what I've always thought because that's what they taught me. It's just a tradition. Now, all of those ways of thinking about ethics would be considered subjective, meaning they are limited to our own individual experiences. All of you, it's really interesting with an online class because all of us are probably in very different places right now. You can see that I'm actually in my bedroom in Brooklyn right now. Many of you may be in New York, you may not be. We're all, even more so than when I say in a classroom, oh, we've all had a different morning. Some people have just had lunch, or they're coming from another class, or they're coming from a job. We're all actually in different places. Our experience of this material is highly, highly subjective. It's highly determined by where we are as individuals. Now, that's fine. And again, that's a reality that we can't escape. But there's also such a thing as objective truth and objective knowledge. So we need to talk about this idea of the object. Here is a cup. This had water in it. It also could hold tea or coffee, whatever you like. But it's an object, right? It's hard. I can feel it. There's not really anything I can interpret about it. My emotions about this cup don't really change the fact that it is a cup. It's an object. So we have something that would be as true as an object on one hand, and then we have something that would be as changeable as our own subjective experiences, our own subjective moods, our own who we are in the world, our race, our gender, our embodiment, our age, whether we're sick or well. All of these things determine our subjective experience of a thing or an idea or of anything in the world. But in philosophy, the reason that this creates a conflict is because my own subjective makeup, my own subjective experience of the world can influence how I perceive reality, right? This is where kind of in a philosophy class we get all about, what is reality? But it does. It determines, they've done studies about eyewitnesses even, that even someone who is so close to an accident or an incident or some sort of situation, who we rely on as the only kind of truth teller, is still influenced by what someone may say a few minutes after something's happened. If you ask them a leading question, oh, did you see so-and-so? They'll, their own subjective experience could be swayed by that. The Greek philosophers used to talk about the ways that our own perception, our very own eyes can mislead us. That if you look at a stick under water, if you think about a creek or a little brook where there's ripples in the creek and you see a stick, the stick might look bent even by your own eyes, but if you reach in to grab it, it might be straight. So we can't even trust our own perception sometimes. So how could we trust our own feelings about something like ethics? How could we trust our own subjective intuitions or just a gut feeling? These are not really reliable places to go when we're talking about making major decisions that would not only affect us, but affect a lot of other people. Like, for instance, right now, the big debate about abortion in this country. Is one person's gut feeling about abortion enough to make laws that would then affect millions and millions of people? This is why these sorts of questions are really important to dissect and to get to the bottom of. So This subjective objective problem is something that we're going to come back to over and over again, and especially in this unit where we're talking about relativism and subjectivism as an ethical theory. So we're looking at why these sorts of perspectives on ethics are just not reliable. It's not okay to say, you know what, my cultural upbringing told me this and this and this is ethically acceptable, therefore it must be true. That's not okay, because once you move outside of your cultural upbringing, or you go to a different place, for instance, you realize that, wait a minute, this isn't how people do it here. So how then do you reconcile those ethical problems if you have different cultures that say different things about it? So the subjective-objective distinction is really important to keep in mind. So anytime you hear subject or subjective, I want you to think of individual, emotional, gut feelings, moods, things that are changing and things that are different from one individual to another. And then when you think about objective, think about object. Back to my cup, something hard. It's not debatable. It's not interpretable. It just is. It's something solid. And, you know, some of you might have started to take this ethics class and you didn't think that something like ethics could be perceived as true or as concrete as an object. But that's what the whole discipline of ethics is about finding the truth in ethics that is just as indisputable as the fact that this is a ceramic cup.